My name is Satish Chetty. I was supposed to present with Tracy Daw, one of the longtime presenters. He couldn't make it, so my presentation's brief. I wanted to start just giving a little bit of background about myself. I'm primarily into software, embedded software systems, and do a lot of aerospace work. My current day job is actually developing software for spacecraft and space Earth imaging satellites and so on. And so the question is, what are you doing at the Polar Conference? So I wanted to give a little bit of background on how this conference started and where we are and so on. So I believe about 2002, 2003 timeframe, I was doing software engineering classes for the aerospace department in Stanford. And at that time, the more popular CubeSats were there. Cube satellites are 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter, 10 centimeter cubes that can do a complete satellite mission, right? And at that time, and even now, it's a pretty impressive thing to do, that you fit everything inside a CubeSat. And you can, it's got its own power, communication, launch it, and it's 1 kilogram. And that was the project. I mean, of course, now each cube unit was called a U unit, and there's 2U, 3U, 4U, 16U spacecrafts available now. People design them as standards. And so at that time we were doing this, and one of the early testing things we wanted to do was, how do we test all this hardware the closest to the space environment? And at that time we had another researcher coming and saying, oh, we have this Antarctic program where we want to use an ice penetrating radar, measure the thickness of icebergs, but right now we have grad students on the iceberg spending several weeks in a dangerous situation. Can we develop some robotic solutions for this? We said, oh, that sounds like a good project. The students took it up. I was one of the mentors. We did a lot of the work. It was a small rover, and it was dragging an ice-penetrating radar, taking data and sending data back through satellite. And this all sounded very nice and impressive. And then we started seeing that a lot of the work that the students were doing was already either being done or being researched, or they were facing challenges that the community could help. Being 2003, not a lot of social media stuff going on, people reached out, and there's a bunch of people said, oh, I can help you with this. There's an Antarctic weather station going on. There's a comms system going on. You can use this hardware instead of that, and that software instead of this, and so on. And descriptions go on. So we realized after few months of working that there was this big community outside that wasn't talking to each other. I mean, yes, it was talking from the science perspective, but not so much on the technology perspective. And everyone was redesigning and developing their own hardware and software and systems. That Iridium SBD, if you're familiar with that, it's a short burst data protocol, was also coming out. It was very exciting. You could send short bursts of data and not have to dial up through Earthlink and AOL. And so that was becoming important. And so after a lot of time and talking with others, we decided that this would be a good idea. So Bob Twiggs was professor at that time at the aerospace department. Ronald Ross and I, three of us said, okay, let's just ask folks who wants to meet, and maybe in person, and see if they want to share this data. We anticipated maybe 10 people would show up. It turned out to be a bigger event than that. We met at NASA Ames at Moffett Field near Stanford. Conference room, pretty much nothing, table, bunch of Subway sandwiches, and we just started talking. It became a 2-day event, and it was well received. And a lot of folks said, oh, I didn't realize that you could do this, or, can you send me data on that? And so it became an open source collaborative, kind of a talk. And it was also always a grassroots level, face-to-face discussion stuff. People come in and say, I have the science problem I want to solve, like the iceberg stuff, right? This is my problem. This is my budget. These are my challenges, right? How do I solve it? Or are there solutions that we could talk to? And most of the time it's like, oh, talk to that person. He's already done something like this, like the penguin counting, for example. Can I have a DSLR camera to take pictures of the penguins instead of a regular webcam? Can the resolution improve? Can I send so much data? Can I do machine learning? That kind of stuff started to fall in place. And then we also started to realize what works and what doesn't work. There's a lot of hardware that claim they work in certain environments. Right? The spec sheet says amazing stuff. And most of the time, they would also work for a brief amount of time. But once you put them in a polar environment, then they stop working. Right? Or they would work erratically. Just to give you an idea, we had this satellite modem that we put in a weather station. And the satellite modem, we put it in a thermal thermal chamber, ran it to minus 40, worked perfectly fine. Everything was good. Turned it off for the night, let it chill for minus 40, came in the next morning, turned it on, the modem heated up and blew up. And then realized that as long as there's power in the modem and it keeps itself warm, the system works. But if it cools down, then it takes this huge draw of current and then it works. So we spoke to the manufacturer. They said, oh, this is an issue, but you're not supposed to use it in that kind of environment. Yeah, of course, those kind of challenges happen. So what works, what doesn't work, that shows up. And then there's also things like what's new, what's coming up, right? Like I said, at that time, SBD was a new thing, and we used these really big modems. And someone said, oh, there's this newer modem that's coming in that's much smaller, that uses less power, and it does all the stuff that you want. Or they come back and say, oh, that weather instrument works better, or this cable works better, or talk to this new vendor that you're willing to try out. So there's always new things for us to try out. And then, of course, the swap challenges, the size, weight, and power challenges. Of course, the C is for the cost. The size, a lot of times you can say, okay, I can design this, but it would require me to have a huge battery bank, big-ass solar panels, or whatever it is, which I can't transport. Right? Some of the challenges, recent challenges are you can't ship lithium batteries. You can order them online. They would show up on a truck, but if you're in Barrow, you can't get them shipped. You have to hand carry them. So there's regulation challenges, and there's other challenges that you come across. And the weight challenges, right? I mean, if you're building a buoy, for example, yes, it is possible for you to build a really ruggedized buoy, but if it's going to be heavy, you can't transport it in an aircraft. And the power challenges, and this is one of talks that we have, is all the power challenges that we have. Batteries that work, don't work, solar panels, diesel, fuel challenges, fuel cell issues, and so on. And the final one is, of course, cost. You can find really good equipment that's really pricey, and sometimes you get lucky by finding hardware that's really cheap and works reliably. One example is the Logitech webcam that you can buy for $60 on Best Buy. It's been used, in the Antarctic environment, minus 40, reliably, and it works just great. It's so popular that many of the self-driving cars nowadays have them installed on them. So those kind of new hardware challenges and the new hardware that is available also shows up. And so our primary discussions was, okay, let's all meet, let's talk about instrumentation. But over time, it has morphed not just from instrumentation perspective, not just power perspective, but the whole community stuff, what works. We've even had satellite systems, comms people come in and say, okay, here's a solution that you could use. And it works in your environment and so on. And the conference in the past was held in multiple locations. That's another bullet point I wanted to talk. We kind of met, the first few ones were in NASA Ames, Moffett Field, then we went to Menlo Park, then moved around the country. Depended on the sponsors we got. This year, we got a nice facility, thanks to the team here. And after the first few years, we couldn't do it as a volunteer effort. There's only so much you could do, arranging tables and saying, okay, come over here, we'll print our own badges and introduce yourself. SRI did a lot of work. They hosted it for several years. They, in fact, ran it until 2016. And 2017, we had a big, long break. And after the big break, this is our meeting again. And so that's a little bit of history and where we are with the Polar Technology Conference and what we do. The past presentations are available. Take a look at them. They're very interesting. Even the old ones are actually very interesting. Everything from moving fuel, using bladders, to satellite comms, to weather stations. A lot of valuable information is there, and the contact information is still available. So take a look. You might always find what you're looking for. Thank you. Any questions? Anything that you would like to specifically cover? You know, the team's here.
Your first statement about how you kind of got going, what was your first email or conversation like? Do you want to just get together and start chatting about our problems? Like, what did that
I tried to look
with?
for that email, actually. That's it's in one of the presentations, actually. So it was kind of like that. Ron Ross was, he runs a company, he worked with Ted Scambors and a few folks. He couldn't make it to the conference this time. He was well connected with the Arctic community. In fact, that's how I got involved as well. And he said, okay, we're doing this, and here's some challenges we're facing. We started emailing folks, and then we said, okay, here's a good list of people who might be interested. I mean, even if they're not the technology people, right? So we've had someone, penguin counting, for example. We could do all that stuff, but the science was the drivers, and the technology was the provider of, you know, making sure that science works. And so that first email was, hey, we were doing all this stuff. Would you be interested in meeting up? And they said, yep, tell me a time and place, and we could do that. And that's how it started.
I'll ask you this because it's new to me too. How soon into the evolution of the conference did you really have the integration of the scientists that need the technology rather than the technologists just sitting around and talking?
It was the very first conference, actually. In fact, we had more than half, I would say, more science folks, mainly because they were looking for solutions, right? And then they would show up and said, I have no idea what this SPD thing means, but would it solve my problem, right? Would it solve my problem within this budget? Right? Have you tried this thing out? What are the challenges, implementation challenges? Who should I talk to? Can you guys do it for me? That kind of questions, right? And so, and then sometimes they would bring in their students and they would say, can you teach this person? And he or she can take it over. So from the very beginning, we had a lot of science folks involved. And that's the nice thing about it. I mean, you don't have to be the nuts and bolts, I2C, canvas kind of a person to actually say, here's my problem. This is what I've been using. You know, I'm satisfied, but I could do better, or I want to do something else. Is there even a solution for this, right? We've had folks asking, you know, I have this huge volume of data that's coming in that I'm collecting on the field. I can't use SBD to transmit this data. And the cost of dialing in and downloading it is tremendous. What can we do, right? Can we do things, you know, how do I get the data? And the solution most likely would be, don't send the data, do the processing right then and there and just send the results back. They may not like it, but you know, that's the kind of brainstorming that usually happens and say, okay, these are our challenges, this is what we do.
Yeah, and I was going to say maybe you can give some perspectives on how it kind of got restarted and what we kind of hope to do moving forward. I'm not, so this is my first Polar Technology Conference, actually. And I was tasked partly by Renee Crane from the Arctic section at NSF to work with Arcus, who is kind of our meetings machines that we've done as a cooperative agreement in the Arctic section to kind of get this back off the ground. And I had no idea. I had never been. I think I had heard it existed. But there seemed to be a ton of enthusiasm for it. And so getting it restarted again, it has been kind of a really nice insight into what could be done. And I think right now the hope is that it will become kind of a 2-year meeting with a lot of interaction in between. And I think we have a session later this afternoon, kind of like hoping for all of everybody's input on what they would want from this space moving forward. And so that's the plan right now, is to have it kind of be an every 2-year event operated by Arcus. And so the funding can kind of stay sustained and that there's always kind of a facility and an organization and group behind it.
Also add, we've had some good in the past, good international participation. When I say good, doesn't mean a lot of them. Travel internationally is always a challenge. We've had the Italian Antarctic group, the British Antarctic Survey group as well. Sometimes remotely, at one point in time, we had one presenter who was trekking across the Arctic, and he dialed in, gave his presentation, disconnected. So the participation has been varied and been always interesting. So take a look at the presentation.
Okay, so if people have any questions, maybe we can, if people have thought of questions for NSF or for more from the technology conference, maybe we can take them now. Yeah.
So my question is, one of the things I was hoping to get out of these conferences when I first heard about them is to have a real good dialogue between the user community and industry to see if we could kind of get around some of those problems. So I've probably not from the same perspective of yours, but I've seen the same sort of phenomenon where PIs will come in trying to take commercial off-the-shelf stuff, trying to make it work in our environment, and there's all kinds of problems. I've heard a few little success stories, I think maybe from the UNAVCO folks, where are the Iris Pascal folks, where they sat down with the vendor and said, hey, if you were just to change out this, that, or the other component in your commercial product, it worked great for us, and they've had a few successes. So on the sensor side, I'm really interested to see, well, what could this group do to make that more of a sustainable phenomenon? Same sort of deal on the satellite comm side. There's a lot of new systems coming along that hopefully I'll touch on tomorrow. And a lot of these guys are working on user terminal development. And I can tell you, except for maybe Iridium, they're probably not really thinking much about our use case. So over the next couple of years, it'll be probably an important time to communicate with industry what our needs are to influence some of their product development. These guys are looking at global markets, and we would just be a small subset of their solution space. But if the dialogue's at the right point in time, small little changes could be able to be made where it would be too difficult later on. So I guess maybe it's kind of a challenge question, but something I'd sure like to see come out of these conferences is improved and sustainable dialogue with all these critical technology sectors and industry.
Share my thoughts on that. Also in the past, one of the things we tried to do with very little success is try to have an active offline discussion group, right? Tried Yahoo groups for social media stuff and so on. And to some extent, the LinkedIn Polar Technology worked. And those are all good questions, like, satellite comms are, I have a sensor that keeps breaking, but that's the closest I can get. Can you point me to someone? And the industry folks are usually involved in that. We've tried as much as possible making sure that this is more of a user community and not a commercial trade show, saying, okay, here's a product that you can use and so on. We've had, and I think we will continue to have industry folks saying, here's our product that meets your operating requirements. But that is a good forum for us to restart and say, okay, here are some of our swap and operational challenges. What can you do about it? Where's the industry going with this? Is there something that we should watch out for? Even with Iridium, we found out that because we are at the poles, some of the satellites are turned off, right? So our coverage is limited, but not zero. So there are a lot of satellite comm communications providers who don't really see the need for them to operate beyond those polar latitudes. So if we have sufficient requests or pushback or saying, okay, this is our need, maybe we can start talking to the right folks.
Yeah, and I think later today we'll go over a mechanism where we think we can have those sustained conversations. The Arctic section also funds the IARPIC Secretariat, and they've created this collaborations portal that is really surrounded, or is really meant for this type of kind of collaboration online in between sessions and in between people being in meetings. So we'll kind of introduce that later this afternoon. And hopefully that can be a way where we can have people in one virtual space constantly interacting with each other. And it has the capabilities to do webinars and things like that. So you can have smaller events in between all of these larger in-person meetings to really drive the discussion and to focus these questions, and to also create a really deep database of technical expertise that people can tap into, whether it's kind of these small problems that one individual PI can have in the field, to these very much larger discussions where it is all US agencies looking for solutions for their polar programs. So.
Hi, I just wanted to add too that I'm with the CROW, which is part of the Army, and DoD's interest in the Arctic is far expanded than it was last time you had this meeting. So, and they really bring a lot to the market space on this. So it adds to your customer base a lot, both for homeland security and search and rescue and you name it. So that's a big, huge change that's happened in the last 4 years.
Yeah, and I will say, I think this time around, and again, I have a limited history with the Polar Technology Conference, is that we are really trying to entrain other agencies into these discussions and not have it be kind of an NSF-driven discussion, especially in the Arctic, because we do work very closely with all the other agencies in the federal space to share logistics and resources, and there's a lot of overlap there. So it is kind of important that we're all in really great communication about what's happening. Okay. And everybody wash your hands, please. Wash your hands.